All right, Steven, let's talk a little bit about the challenges of making sure that the musician gives good performance, because in the end it's all about the performance. We have all the gear that we would ever want, and gear is getting cheaper and cheaper, but in the end it's really about the music that the musician is giving you.
Yeah. I think most of it is sort of the psychological part of it, and getting somebody in a space where they're comfortable to either play to the best of their ability or even better than they're used to playing. And that can be anything. It can just be killing the lights and lighting some candles. It could be cranking them in their headphones, and because they just like to hear a lot of them.
Right.
There's a lot of things, and it's you sort of develop this kind of bag of tricks that you don't really tell people about, because you don't want them to feel like they're being used on them.
Right.
For example, like if the drummer's like playing way too fast,
yeah,
and he's like really pushing the click, a lot of times I'll just take it way past where there's any audio, and I'll change the BPM like 15 BPM slower. And he's like, just play this for like a minute and a half, and he starts to get this slower tempo in his head. It's like, okay, let's go back to the song. And now the song feels fast to him, and he's a little more in the pocket.
Huh.
But he just needed a reset button.
Right.
And maybe he's a great drummer, and he was just kind of like, when he was warming up, he was playing really fast, so now he's having a hard time getting back to that original groove of the song. If it's a guitar player that's struggling with their timing, just hitting the reset button in a different kind of way and just saying like, hey, I just have a crazy idea, and then just like turn on a pedal to some obscene setting and just say, just bear with me, and just kind of play that part of this ridiculous setting. And all of a sudden it's like their brain switches into like, what the hell is this guy doing? And they're not thinking about it, they're just indulging my ridiculous request. It's like, okay, yeah, that didn't really work, let's go back to how it was. And now their brain's in a completely different spot than it was 2 minutes ago. And all of that stuff is like, has nothing to do with the gear. And it's so much about the job, you know, it's just sort of figuring out what makes somebody tick.
Yeah, yeah, pushing them in the right direction that you know they can go, but aren't going.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like there's sort of the placebo effect of every like live sound guy when sort of has the joke, and it's like, hey, can I get more monitor? And the imaginary, slides the imaginary fader. Okay, good, got it.
Oh, I've done that a ton of times.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you don't ever tell somebody, you know, in the middle of it, you don't want them to feel like they're on the receiving end of an experiment.
Yeah.
But that kind of stuff is really important, and they'll thank you for it later.
Right. Yeah, one of the things is when I was doing live sound in like smaller venues, like the aux end was already at the top. So I physically couldn't give them more volume,
right.
But then that's the only thing I could do was hope that they just psychologically heard themselves better.
Absolutely, the infinity pot. You
Yeah.
just keep turning and turning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of monitors, how do you, I for one have a very hard time recording with headphones, and I struggle with getting a good headphone mix. So how do you go about getting a good headphone mix and the monitor mix for the musicians?
That's one of those things that I try to remove myself from that equation as much as possible. And the headphones that we use here, we use a hearback system. And basically it's 4 stereo sends that I can send in. We talked a little bit about before how I have my Pro Tools session set up where everything has a bus. So from that bus, I just send drums to 1 and 2. Send bass to 3, guitars to 4, you know, click to 5, whatever, and let them get their own mix. One, I can't get blamed for a bad headphone mix. It's on them to kind of dial it in. And also, it's important. It's like the drummer might want to hear more of himself than he normally would. The guitar player might want to hear less of the bass guitar so that he can really focus in on the detail of his intonation or whatever. So that's how we do headphones here.
Okay. What about, do you do any tricks like sending them reverb or sending them like a compressed signal of theirs as well, like when they're overdubbing or when they're recording vocals or anything like that, so they hear their mixed version?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's different for everybody. Some people want to sing really dry because they feel like they can really hear the details of their vocal part without reverb. Most people, though, I mean, it's so unnatural. There's reverb everywhere. You know, you're always in a space, so to be in with headphones is a really unnatural experience. But yeah, if it's an aggressive part, I might distort it, just like send it to an aux and send that aux to them, so that it's not messing with the tracking. And you know, distort a little bit, compress it, because all of a sudden they have this confidence because they can hear every little lip smack in their performance. But yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So how would you handle a situation when you have an unprepared musician in the studio that you sort of know that if the session goes badly, he's going to blame you for it?
Would be a musician that is, you know, the artist, not the hired guy?
Yes.
Okay. I present him with options. I'm all about the options.
Right.
I mean, I don't really do hourly rates here. I do kind of project things. So if something that should take somebody an hour to do is going to take them 4 hours because they're unprepared, that's different than the sort of things you run up against that are out of everybody's hands that, you know, extend a project. But I'll give them options. It's like, hey, you can go into the other room, you know, send them into Studio B for an hour, so kind of work out the part. We're going to keep moving on to something else while you're doing that, instead of spending, you know, 3 hours recording something that should take 20 minutes to do.
Right.
So that would, you know, we can do that. You can come back a different day. I can hire somebody, but, you know, kind of give them an option versus just saying like, hey, it kind of sucks that you're unprepared. And then it's just kind of like, kind of awkward and weird, and nobody wants to try.
Yeah, and just the session just...
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like you kind of keep things going. And it's like, and you can even say it in ways like, one, I don't have to tell him that I'm bummed that he's unprepared.
Yeah.
That is not for that moment.
All right.
In that moment, my job is to get him prepared in whatever it means. At the end of the session, however, that is the time to say, hey, your guitar parts are, you know, we need to tackle those next Thursday. Here's some things I was thinking about that you could be working on between now and then, so we can expedite that.
Right, like a fancy way of saying you have to go home with a purse.
Totally. It's like, but that moment isn't the moment to do it. It's sort of like you wait and you choose your moment. Everybody's not trying to be creative. Yeah, exactly. You can't destroy a session just because of that. No, I mean the justice part of me wants to be like, come on, dude.
Yeah, exactly.
But bite your tongue and, you know, things go on.
Right. So what would you do if you're recording live or you're recording a band and there's very obvious that one band member is not as good as the other ones or not pulling their weight as much? You have these songs that are really good, but they're going to suffer for the lack of talent, or not necessarily talent, but just unpreparedness on that person's end.
Right. I think the first thing I would do is, if it's being tracked live, I would make sure that whatever they were doing wasn't going to interfere with getting a good take for everybody else. So if his guitar sounded great on 7 kind of cranked, but it's going to bleed into the mics and I know I'm going to have to overdub all those guitars later, his guitar then goes down to 3. And he's there basically to fill that space, but knowing we're going to address it at a later point. If that wasn't an option, that's kind of part of the somebody that really like wants everything and everybody to be great, and that doesn't always happen. And so in that moment, you kind of have to make a judgment call, like, can I make this better? What's the point of the recording? Is it just kind of local blues band trying to make a demo? Is it a label project where, you know, the bar is really high? Those are 2 totally different scenarios. Who I'm accountable to is different. And sometimes a bunch of guys in a room recording and just having fun, who cares? Who cares if the guitar player isn't great? They're just going to take it home and show their friends and family, and, you know, fantastic. And it was what it was. If I'm accountable to a label or to a manager, or that's a completely different story, and those are hard conversations.
Right. So one of my biggest problems is recording to a click. So I'm a guitar player, and I like playing with drummers, obviously, and I have a very hard time doing like a musical performance to a TikTok.
Sure.
And I can record to loops and shaker loops and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But so my question is, how do you deal with the situation when a musician has a hard time recording to a click?
These days, like in the scenario you just described, I mean, a wood block on eighth notes is the most unnatural sounding timekeeper. It's terrible, and there's guys that don't even hear it. You know, they're just like, they're so good, it just blends in, and they're not even flamming with the click. Great, good for them. Most people don't possess that skill. And fortunately, it's 2014, and it can take about 8 seconds to whip together a quick loop of a kick and a snare, or a shaker and a kick, or whatever works.
Right.
And, you know, on that note, like, a lot of times if you have a drummer that cranks his click and the overhead mic is 18 inches above his head, that really high-pitched click sound is, you know, primed to go right into that mic. So a lot of times, like, a kick and a shaker might be a better option anyway.
It blends better into the final mix.
Yep, absolutely. But there's, if all it is finding the right collection of things to keep time, it takes a minute of just sort of sitting down and making it happen. No excuses.
Right. No. So as a musician myself and an audio engineer, I want to ask the question of whether you approach a session differently and handle the people in the band if they're either well versed in audio or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's different. Yeah, I mean, it's in the age where everybody knows a little bit.
Right.
You know, everybody has GarageBand or whatever. Some people are, you know, will hover over my shoulder and be like, oh, you can put a crossfit on that edit.
Can I get more 3 counters in a room?
Right, it's like, I kind of want to punch stuff when that happens. But yeah, everybody knows a little bit, but the reality is that they're still, even if they're a little overbearing or misguided or just trying to maybe relate to you.
Yeah.
It's, if I'm a jerk and I'm just like, hey, I know what I'm doing, just kind of back off, they still have to go in there and put on a bass guitar or sit behind the piano, so that doesn't help anybody. So, and sometimes it's appropriate, and I've done it where it's just like, everybody's out. Kick everybody out of the control room. I'm going to comp this take together, and I don't need 7 different people telling me 7 different opinions about which drum fill into the chorus is better.
Right. Go to lunch.
Yeah, go to lunch. I'll take care of this. If you have an issue with what I comped together, sure, let's go over it.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's totally appropriate to just give everybody the boot. Sometimes it happens.
Cool.
Yeah.
So on the same note of what we were talking about before, let's talk about a little bit about the differences and the potential disadvantages to being both the engineer and the musician. So when you're wearing a lot of hats, what kind of advice would you be giving people that always have to be switching from producer, engineer to musician?
There are very few people that can do both of those things really well simultaneously. My solution for myself is that I have somebody that I trust implicitly, so that when it's time for me to put a guitar on or go hop behind the keyboard, he knows me and it's kind of like, hey, even if it's just, can you press record while I work on this? They're capable of doing that, and it allows me to really just free myself up to think differently. And I appreciate the feedback that they may be able to offer, and I rarely try to wear both hats at the exact same time. I try to say like, okay, I'm going to play some guitar part, even if it's just showing somebody like, I'm going to set up the tone, I'm going to get it going, but when it's time, I'm going to go sit over there, and I need you to push a chord for me. And I show them a couple of keystrokes so that they can do it, and it allows me to switch gears.
Cool. Yeah, so mostly about, you know, delegating it with utmost trust to somebody else.
Yeah, and even clients, I mean, if I get all the grunt work done, and I get a tone set up or whatever, you can teach somebody how to hit 3 on a keypad, and you know, when it's time to do that.
Uh-huh.
There's really not a lot of reasons why I would have to do both unless I was just going by myself.
Right.
I understand the romance of wanting to be like that guy that does everything.
Right.
It's like the liner notes say like recorded, mixed, produced, engineered, performed. But
By
like,
Prince.
Yeah, we're not all of us are Prince.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you surround yourself with people that are good, ultimately, I'm in the belief that it makes you look better anyway, and it pushes you to grow as an artist and as an engineer, producer, whatever.
Cool. Yeah.